Hello friends, welcome to ERP Apps Developer Series. In the first part, I've shown you how you can deploy it quickly on your local machine, and also I gave you very high level overview of the ERP apps we are going to develop. In second part, I've shown you how to create your local development environment and set up Angular and Angular Material Framework. Now in third part, I've shown you how you can create and implement a social authentication. That means authenticating your user using an email password and Facebook or Google authentication. And on this part, we are going to only focus on the role-based security. Functionality we are going to implement in this case, as you can see, user will be able to use an existing Google account, sign into the application. And as you can see, in this case, user is an admin. So we'll have access to a lot more navigation items than other ordinary users. User will be able to update other user privileges using the admin screen. So for example, in this case, user is an employee. So this admin can go ahead and give it another roles to this particular user. Now let me log out. And I want to log in as another user, which is not an admin. All right. So as you can see, this user is not an admin, is an employee. So definitely will not see the admin related navigation items. So this is the kind of the behavior we are trying to implement, and this is the functionality we'll achieve at the end of this video. After user is logged in, user can go to the settings page or logout page. So let's go start working on our settings page. Once you head out to your terminal window, make sure that you're in the same directory where you can see the package.json file. Now next command you want to shoot is nggc, that means generate component. Inside UI, inside auth, I'm going to create a component called settings. Flat equals to true, that means do not want to create a separate folder for it. And skip test equals to true. What does it mean? I do not want a spec file. Similarly, I want another file. This is the header. So I'm going to put that header under the shared folder, shared header. Now header is the new navigation where I'm going to keep all the navigation items for my application. After the component is generated, make sure that is added to your app.module file. Now in our application, if I click on this, still nothing happens. So I think I need to start my application ng serve. Okay, now my application is serving, but still nothing happens. So I think I'm missing one more thing. So let's go to your app.routing.module.ts file. And I think I need to start that navigation. So let me import settings component. And then I need to include it to my routes array. So path settings equals to this. All right, let me save this. Now let's go back to application. If I click on this, now this link takes you to the settings page. This looks good. In my settings.component.html, first thing I want to appear is the header. So let's go to the header.component and copy that app header selector, include it here, app header. Now let's go start building our header. We want to include a mat toolbar. Again, if you're wondering where this mat toolbar is coming from, go to material.angular.io, look for the component toolbar and copy that implementation. All right, let's go back here, and this is the toolbar I want. So inside the toolbar, I'm going to give it a color, and then inside that I'm going to create a row. I want my toolbar to look like this. So first thing I'm going to include, the first item is a button. Now again, I want to include a fancy, many fabulous button. All right, go to the button. You can find all this implementation on Angular Material website. Here you go. This is the button I want to include. All right, so inside this button, I want to include a material icon. So I'm going to include a material icon, which is menu. Again, you can find all of this information. Go to the material.io, look for the icon, say menu. All right, so this is the material icon I want to include. Perfect. Let's come back here. Okay, next thing I want to include, give it a little space, and then I want to include another icon which represents the page. Okay, so let's go include that. And then I want to put an image title here, say about us or whatever that image, the page title is. And then followed by, I want to get another div style spacer And then I want to include two more icons, settings icon and help icon. Now, when the user clicks on the help button, I want a mini text to appear. So I'm going to create this help button as a menu item. Let's create the help menu. Okay. And I'm going to create a small template and then give it a, call it like, let's call it a mat menu and include the help text inside that. So when the user clicks on the help icon, it's going to display this text. Perfect. That looks good. We want to make few more changes because this is the header we want to use in many other files. So instead of hard coding this text, let's make it a little more dynamic. So what we want to do here, let's go to header.component.ts. Let's include the input. All right. Here we are going to define a couple of the input parameters like image URL. And then instead of hard coding that material icon we are displaying, we are going to just display it dynamically. Let's include image URL. Now the same thing for the text. So instead of displaying the title bar title text, we want to include this as a parameter, page title. So let's go define one more input, page title. And while I'm here, let's include help text as well. All right, let's go back. And here I'm going to, because if you remember, this help text is coming from the backend.service, and we have defined all of this help text information into environment file. So what we are going to do here, depending on which page this header is included, we are going to display the help text accordingly. So we are going to declare another variable called this.config data, and we are going to say this.config data, and we'll get it from the backend service. Now backend service is not defined yet. So let me just recap. If config data is equal to login, so it's going to display only login related help text information. And same is for other things. Now let's go include the backend service as well. So import from services directory, backend service. All right, let's include them into our constructor, private underscore backend service is of type backend service. That looks good. Let's save this. Let's include a couple of the actual navigation items. So I'm going to call the mat menu trigger on the menu. Now let's include mat menu, which is of type root menu. And inside this, I'm going to include a couple of the links, the actual links. So for example, address book, about us, and admin. Let's start with about us. Address book and admin. So right now you might be worrying about like how to define the roles and responsibilities, but we'll cover that part later. At this point, I only want to display all the navigation items, and we'll come back once the roles and responsibilities, once we set up the user role collection, then we'll come back and show and hide these menu items depending on the user roles. But for now, this looks good. So if I compile this, everything saves good. So these are the three items the user will be able to see. Now, before we go to our browser window, I think there are a couple of more changes we have to do. So remember this app header? Now here we have to define the input parameters so that, the header.component.html file, it will display it accordingly what we are going to include. So as you can see, I'm going to include an image URL, and I need a nice looking material icon. So let's go to material icon, and here find an icon called settings. All right, settings, same thing, page title is equal to settings, and define that. Now let's go back to our browser window. Let's refresh. Page is refreshed. It works. Now we need to fix one more typo here. Go to header.component.html. Remove extra text. Save. Refresh. It should work now. Now, right now, don't worry about how these navigations items are shown or hidden depending on user's role. We'll come back and make those changes later on once the user's roles is defined. Now let's go start working on the settings.component.html file. Idea is we are going to implement a form. So first, create a magnet card. Inside this met card, I want to create a div. Now this div, I want to display only the save changes equals to false. Now what are these save changes? So for example, if user already saved the changes, then I want to display a message that your changes are saved. Otherwise, show the form. So I'm going to say div ngif save changes. Otherwise, show that form. So let's go include that save changes Boolean variable in our TypeScript file. I'm going to say save changes is of type Boolean equals to false. All right. So let's go back to our settings.component.html file. So in this area, we are going to have the new form. And if the user's changes are saved, we are going to include an ng template and we'll display a message saying your changes are saved. So let's go ng template, your changes are saved, and let's include a button. All right, that looks good. So now let's go back to the div and start working on our form. Okay. First thing we want to have, give it a name. This is a template driven form. That means a very simple form. So form data is equals to ng form. And the first thing I'm going to include, let's include a mat called content and put some title here. Give it a name saying update settings. All right. After this, let's include the mat progress bar. Again, this is the progress bar. Once the user clicks on the submit button, you want to show some kind of a spinner bar or something, some icon that user is hit on something. So let me show you what it looks like. Go to material.angular.io, look for a spinner bar, progress bar. All right. So see, this is the progress bar we want to implement. So go back to HTML code, and here we'll say mode equals to indeterminate, and then we want to say ngif equals to data loading. Only if the data loading equals to true, then only show this bar. So let's include one more Boolean variable, data loading Boolean equals to false. All right, let's go back here. And same thing, just like this progress bar, I want to display the error message. So again, if the error is true, show the error message. Let's go back to TypeScript file, include two more Boolean variables, error and error message. All right, let's save this. Now we can start implementing our form. So I'm going to include a submit button. And by default, this button is disabled if the form is not valid. Again, this is a very good idea to include some kind of error validation for your form. All right, so I'm going to include a method called click on submit. So right now it doesn't understand what on submit is. We'll go back. But first, let me just finish the buttons part. Now let's go to TypeScript file. Let's create a blank method called on submit, which takes all the form data parameter. We are going to leave this blank. And same thing, the logout button. Okay, we'll come back to this TypeScript file, finish these details later. But first, let's just finish the HTML part. So after this, let's include the first input. That means I'm asking users to enter their name. So this is the input box for the name. All right, let's include some error validation for the name input type. So if I say, if the name is invalid and the name field is dirty, that means user click on the name input text and doesn't enter anything. Then we want to display this message saying name is required. Let's include a couple of other error validations for minimum length and for maximum length. All right, so if minimum length, let's display the minimum length message. Same thing for maximum length. It looks good. All right, so this is for the name. Now let's go include one more form field for the email. So just like we did before, let's include the error validation for email. Okay, and after that we want to include one more field for phone. So let's go include phone. Phone is a little bit tricky because we want only the numeric digits to be entered. So I'm going to include a different kind of validation. It's called pattern. So once you define, this is the regex pattern. So user will be able to enter only one of these characters. Now let's go include one more. It's the same error message for phone. Okay, one last thing I want to include is the role. Now this role, ideally it should be read only and it should not be even displayed to the user. User should not have an option to display, display what kind of role, or he doesn't have an option. Only an admin assign or revoke the roles. But I'm just going to, just for the debugging purpose, I'm going to include this field for role. Okay. So later on, when we come back, whenever this finalized, we will make sure that this field is hidden. That means I do not want this field to be displayed to the user. All right, so let me just put this in the comment so that we don't forget. Okay, perfect. So my HTML file, it looks pretty good. Let me just format it so that it's nicely formatted. Okay, let's save this. Okay, I'm just going to update the title so that I know that this is the new user. Now let me save this. Now let's go start working on our two methods, on submit and log out. When user clicks on that on submit button, I want that data to be saved inside the Firebase database. Now I'm going to create a new collection, say user settings, but inside that collection, every document belongs to one user. So the trick is, what I want to do, I want to have each user own that document. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to include the Angular Fire path package here. The reason I did that, because user is already authenticated. So let me go include that into my constructor. Say public AF auth is of type Angular Fire auth. And the reason I'm including this, so that I can get the UID. And let me show you in a minute what UID is. But before I do that, so let's go to the ng on init. That means as soon as the component is initialized, what I want to do here, I want to subscribe to that authentication auth state. So this .af auth state, and I'm going to subscribe to that. Subscribe. And then what I want to do here, I want to subscribe to that auth state and capture this to my local auth state variable. So this .auth state equals to auth state. Now this auth state will have the UID. Now what this UID is, the whole idea is I want to capture the user's information to one of his own document, and the document's ID is supposed to be the authenticated user's UID. Let me save this. And just to show you what this UID is, let me do that in console.log. All right. Now let's go save this document and let's go to the Firebase side of it. So the whole point is, if you remember, when the user clicked on that authentication, see, so let's go to the Firebase authentication. You will see an row. So this is the user, and this is the UID I was talking about. Okay. Now take this UID, and this UID, as you can see, it matches exactly with this UID. So now the whole idea is I want to capture this user information in a document which will have this ID. So let's say on submit, I'm going to turn the spinner on, the progress bar on. So data loading equals to true. So that will, that will show the user that, okay, he's doing something, the progress bar will start moving. And then what I want to do here, this .backend.service, and very simple, I'm going to say set user. So when you do the set user, it expects 3 different parameters. First is the collection name, second is the ID of the document, and third is the form data. Simple. So now, once you do that, I just want to, subscribe to that, and maybe, show the errors, if any, or show. So for example, see, if there's an error, I want to display the error message here. And if there is no error, I want to display that changes are saved. So what I'm going to say, if the results becomes true, that means the changes are saved successfully. I want to display a message. So save changes equals to true. If not, then I want to display the error message here. All right, looks good. And when everything is done, I want to turn the progress bar, that means the spinner, off, so that user will say whenever the processing is finished, you just want to make sure that you turn the data loading equals to false. So at this point, if I save this and recompile my application, let me just go through this again. It looks good. There are no errors. Okay. This .authstate.uid is the ID of the document. So it looks like it's complaining about the backend service. Let me import that service again. Import backend service. Go to my constructor, include that as a private variable. Private underscore backend service is of type backend service. Let me save this. Let's go to the backend service and make sure this method set user doc. So as you can see, it's taking that collection name, document ID, and the form data. So let's go to this backend service, make sure that this method is defined appropriately, as you can see. So here it takes three different parameters: collection name, document ID, and the actual data. And as you can see, it very cleverly it adds a couple of extra fields. These fields are when the document was created and who created it. Author equals to doc ID, and then updated, when was this updated and when it was created. I like that, looks good. Okay. So this way, you know when exactly the user created and when it was updated. Remember, these are two different things. Okay, so when we create the method called updated, you will understand what's the difference. But this is the first time when the user is created. All right, so that looks good. Now, if I save this, go back to my my form and try to fill something, I'm pretty sure it will give you an error. But I want you to pay attention to this error. So let's go and fill out the information. Give it a phone number. And save this. It should come back with an error. See, it says it's complaining about the missing permission. So that's the idea. See, now let's go fix this error. So the reason it's complaining because it doesn't know how to, remember in our database rules, everything is read and write, everything is false. So now let's go create a new rule. And what I want to do here, I want to say match, especially because it's trying to write it to the user settings collections. So I'm going to create a new rule, say user settings, and inside the document I will say allow create if the user is signed in. User is signed in. Now at this point you might be wondering what is this signed in. So and what is this is content change. So let me first just say create this rule, and now let's create those two helper functions. So what is signed in? So let's go create this function, and I will call it a helper function. Signed in means when the user is authenticated. So I'm going to say if the request.auth.uid is equal to true, that means it's not null. That means user is signed in. So that's what it means. Second thing is only content change. Now this is very, please pay attention to this. It is very necessary to include that. The reason I'm including this, first time if the user logs into your application, he creates a new account, he can make himself an admin. So that way there will be no security in your application. So I want to make sure when the only content change function, what it does, it says, okay, you are not making yourself an admin. So I will say, the data.role is equal to blank. That means your form does not contain any role self-assignment. So, that's how you can, save your database to be, otherwise the new user will hack into your database and they can make themselves admin. Now let's go, if I click on this update button, see, it works now. So that's how you created the first rule and you have authenticated. And if you go back to the collection, see the user is created, and you can see browse through all the fields here. So it will show you the author fields. That means who created this user and when it was created, and email and name and etc. Those kind of a thing. And the role is by default is blank. So now I think it looks pretty good. Now user is created. It's time to read it. So I'm going to create a new function called getUserDoc. Very similar implementation, just like the setUserDoc. The only difference is instead of setting that information, this time I'm just reading it. So same thing, data loading equals to true, and then backend service get user doc, and I'm going to users, and I'm going to pass the document ID. The whole idea, this is the reason why I was interested to make that UID as the document ID, because every time this user comes back with the same authentication, I know exactly what is the document ID of this user's ID is. That the document ID is equals to user's UID. So this looks good now. The only thing is like, now how do I know? So on the ng on init, I'm going to call this function called this.getUserDoc. Okay. So ng on init. So just say this.getUserDoc. All right. So every time this component is initialized, it will know that user is already out there or not. So I'm just going to include one more variable called new user, and the data dollar. So data dollar is like, where I'll get all the values. Again, if I refresh the screen, it's going to give me the error. Same reason. So just like, because we created the database rules for setting the document, but we did not create it for the reading the document. So let's go create one more rule here. Say allow read is equals to is signed in and is doc owner. Now, what is doc owner? You don't want one user to read other person's document, right? So this is the reason I'm going to create one more function here saying is doc owner. So that means user will see only his ID, only his document. So is doc owner. Now let's go create this function is doc owner, and inside this function, very simply, as I'm going to say, the user's UID should match with the author. So remember, that's why we stored the user's UID inside a field called author. So as long as those fields matches, so that means you are the one who created your own document, and once you start reading it, you will receive only your document. You will that means you will read only your document. I hope it makes sense. So I think that's pretty much it. Rules are saved. Now let's go back to my application here. This time if I refresh, it should know that who you are. Update this. So if I go back to the data, see, this is the whole reason we created this author field. Author field is equals to UID. So that's what doc owner is using. So doc owner means author field is equals to UID. Now let's go back to the settings page. If I refreshed it, it should read your files over there. So see, I think I haven't finished the implementation. So let's go to the get user doc. Okay. Now inside get user doc. So now let's go finish that implementation. So when the results are true, what I want to do here, I want to get all the results into the data dollar variable. So let's go fix that. This dot data dollar equals to res. Okay. Get rid of this dot data dollar equals to res. Next thing I want to do, I also want to set up another variable. So let's go define a Boolean variable, say new user. So I'm going to copy this and use of type Boolean new user. So that's how I know that user already exists or not. So here I will say user new user equals to true. Okay. So now let's go. Remember, I want to create two separate forms. One is for the update, other is for the new user. So here I'm going to create another div here. I will say ng if, and if the new user is equals to true, then show this form. Otherwise, show an updated form. Again, you can combine those two, create one form, but I just want to simplify it. So that's the reason I'm creating two separate forms. It's definitely not necessary, but I just want to show you just to have the clear code. So that's how I'm going to create the separate ng template. ng template. Okay, now let's copy this entire form, because this is the new user form. Put it inside this div when the new user equals to true. Now at the same time, what I want to do, copy the same form here for the updated form. So the difference between new user form and the updated form is the way the values are stored. So let me create another label here so that so for example, the name. So when you say name or role, so here the difference is when the user is updating. So the way to you need to have a two-way binding. So I will just say ng model and create the two-way binding and say I'm going to subscribe to that data dollar variable here. So very simple, I'm just going to say data dollar async, and I'm going to display the name, email, and role. Data dollar, okay, that looks good now. Save. Okay, now let's go back and try to, now it knows that which form. See, this know that user already exists, so it's going to display all the values what was stored into the database. All right, let's go back here. See, it knows, it pulls the data live from the database, and role was blank, so it's not displaying anything. So now let's go back. I'm going to create, just make a modification just to make sure it's working fine. So again, it's creating an error. Same reason. Remember, we set the rules for create and we did it for read, but we did not create it for update. So let's go to the rules, and this time I want to just say allow update. So allow update, same thing, if signed in and doc owner. All right. Allow update. Owner, publish this. So while I'm here, I want to create one more rule for delete. So allow delete if admin. So let's do one thing. If the person is admin, then only he will be allowed to delete that. So what is it, admin? So let's go create another function, helper function called isAdmin. So only admin will have only admin will be allowed to delete this any user's document. User can read it, edit it, but he cannot delete it. So how you will know that user is an admin? So remember, we can make an admin. So every user has a field called role. So if the role is equals to admin, so data.role equals to admin, that means user is an admin. So that looks pretty good now. Okay, changes are saved. Okay, user roles, settings, this document. Here, see that if I change this to admin, that makes user an admin. Again, this is you can have a separate page, and I'm going to show you at the end of the video where you can have a separate page. You can control it entirely through your application UI. But just want to show you, first time you need to have one admin. So that's how you make an admin. Okay, I'm not going to do that again. See, this time if I make the updates, it's saved. So my read is working, update is working, and my create is working. All the three different things are working now. Okay, so now let's go back. There's one last thing I want to show you here. So just want to make sure that updates are captured. See, it's changed to user 3 now. That looks good. Okay. Here, now if the user is updating, I just want to create a different method for that. Now let's go back, and then you will see why I'm creating two different methods. One is for new user, other is for updating user. So let's go give it a different names. Let's go to the component.ts file, and here I'm just going to say on submit for new user, and that stays the same. I'm going to copy this and duplicate it, and this time I'm just going to say set user for the update. Okay, and instead of so this time I'm going to create a different method for it, and you will see exactly why. So new doc is using the set user method. Here I'm going to say update doc. Now let's go back to your backend.ts file, backend service.ts file. So let's call it a update doc. Everything else stays the same. Now in update doc, let me copy paste this set user doc, change the name to update doc. All right, and updated. When you are updating, see, you do not need the created at. That's how you know when the user was actually created and when it was updated. So I'm going to get rid of those fields in the update. So let's go back here. See, so I only need bare minimum. I don't even need like other things here. So that's how you know when you update it, you will know that when the user was created and when the user was updated. One last thing, very critical. I do not, when the user is updating itself, again, you can go hack into the system and make yourself an admin. So I want to go back and fix one of my rule. So remember, this function is content change. I want to say here, if the content is changed, is blank, or maybe, so for example, the first time it was blank, but I gave you an employee role. So next time when you come back here, it's going to fail. So I want to say whatever, if the role was blank or the role exactly matches what was assigned earlier. So once you see that in action, it will make more sense. So the whole idea is you cannot change your own role. If it is a blank, leave it blank. If you are an employee, then when you are updating your form or the information, it stays the same. So that's the whole reason. That's how you control that user is not hacking into the system and assigning a different role to themselves. So I hope that makes sense. Once you see that in action, it will make more sense to you. And I'm going to include all of these Firebase rules to my GitHub repository. And if you have any issues, please feel free to open an issue log. All right, before we go ahead, I want to make few more changes to my Firebase rules. So here, remember, admin is the role which is allowed to read, write, and update you to my user settings. So like what we did for delete, I just want to include an or condition to my read, create, and update. And I'm just going to make sure that admin can read, update, and create any of these collections. Now, just in case, I want to show you one more thing. Just like is admin function, you can create as many functions as you like. So for example, like you have this helper function, say is admin, you can have the similar function, say is employee. Now similarly, you can have as many roles as you want, like admin, employee, staff, teacher, or temporary staff, whatever you want to do. So similarly, the idea stays the same. So for example, in this case is employee, and all you need to do, data.role is equals to employee. That's how you know that this is an employee. So you can create as many as functions as you want, and you can use those functions inside your collections. So that's what we'll be doing in the future upcoming collections. For example, address book, CRM, or any of the collections, will be using the similar rules. So I think that's pretty much it. Now let's go ahead, and it's time to move on to the header.component.ts. Now in this module, what we are going to do, remember all the navigation items. So we are going to control how to show and hide the navigation items. So just like what we did in setting.component.ts, we want to capture the user's role. So let's go back to header.component.ts file here. First thing I want to do, so remember that Angular Fire Auth package we have to include. So first, let's copy that out. First, let's auth state. Let's create a variable called auth state. Now let's call out the Angular Fire Auth module, Angular Fire Auth, and now I'm going to include that to my constructor. So public AF auth equals to Angular Fire Auth. On my ng on init, let's say this dot auth state, and I'm going to subscribe to that. And whatever auth state comes, I'm going to include that inside my auth state. All right, so now my auth state has the UID. So now I'm going to read that user's role. So it's very similar to the setting.component.ts file. I'm going to copy this method, get user doc. The only difference is this time I'm going to read the user's role. So for example, and the user is an admin or employee or whatever that is, I'm going to read that document. And once I read that document, I'm going to get another document, which is the role. So this dot user dot doc, and then let me copy this. Okay. So here, once I have that data, so now see that this dot data dot dollar. So here the res, it knows what is the user's document is. Now, but remember, I'm not asking for the user's role. I want the roles definition. So this is where I already know what my user's role is. And now let's go read the user's role documentation. Okay. So roles, okay. Right now, remember the user role is not defined yet. So we may have to, now not may, we have to go back to the database. Now here I'm manually going to create another document. It's called user underscore roles. The roles are the definition where I'm going to keep all the, all the privileges. So say user's role, let's create so for all the admin pages, I'm going to create a document admin, and inside the document, I'm going to create the map fields. So address book, visible, read, write, and delete. So again, just to recap, the user role is a collection, and inside that collection, I want to have one role for each of the pages. So for example, admin is a page, address book is a page, CRM is a page. So in this case, so in admin, so what admin can see? Admin can see everything what's from the address book. Okay, all right. Now, so admin can see everything from the admin page. So admin, let's say map, and again, let's include those 4 fields, read, write, visible, and delete, and everything is true. So user roles, inside that user role, I have a role called admin, and admin can see everything from the admin, and admin can see everything from the address book. Let me save this. Let me create another document just to avoid any confusion. So inside this user role, I'm creating a new role called employee. Now employee role, now it has, say, what can employee see from the admin menu? Answer is nothing. So inside that employee, admin, map, and everything is false. So visible, read, write, delete is false, because employee cannot see anything from the admin menu. So it's necessary for all of your navigation items, you have to declare them false. All right. Now employee can see everything from the address book. So now employee, let's go create another field called address book. Address book is a map, and inside that map, let's create 4 different privileges: read, write, visible, and delete. Now everything is true. So again, employee cannot see anything from the admin menu, but employee can see everything from the address book menu. I hope that makes sense. So once you start creating more of roles like this, it will be more clear to you how to create the different roles and how to use those roles inside your application. All right, that looks good. So now here, now I know what my user's role is. Now is the time to get the user's role definition. So here, it should be users. Okay. Now I want to say this dot data dollar equals to this dot backend service, and this time I want to get the roles. So see, I am reading the roles document here. Okay, and I know what my user role is. So now let's go back here. Now again, it's going to give you an error, because remember, we have to create a new rules for the user's roles. So I'm going to create a new rule, and I'm going to say read if signed in, and everything else should be false. Okay. Now let's go give this guy a role. This looks good. Okay, so now this, as you can see, this is the user UID, and it has a role. Now I'm going to this role, and I'm reading that roles all the privileges. So that's how this whole role-based functionality is working. Now let's go back, this dot role dot. No, now this dot data dollar, that means this field has all the role privileges what this user can see. Okay. Now since I know what the user can see or cannot see, now let's go back to header.component.html file and let's see. For example, this is the menu, say address book. So I want to hide this menu or show or hide this menu based on the user privileges. So all we need to do here, data $async and say address book.visible. So remember, if the employee role, if the address book.visible is equals to false, it will not even appear. So here in this case, data dot admin.visible, remember this is false, so this menu will not even appear. So that's how you show and hide menu depending on user's role. See, admin doesn't even appear here. So similar concept we are going to apply on the different roles, and that's how you control how to show and hide the menu items depending on user's role. See, it works now. All right, that looks pretty good. So I think that's pretty much it on the how to show and hide the menu items. So now let's go move on to one last thing. I think very important thing, app.routing.module. Inside my app.routing.module, it's time to secure all of our routes. So let's include Angular Fire Auth Guard. I also want to include a couple of default implementation like redirect unauthorized logins to and redirect and custom claims. I'm going to include a couple of other RxJS operators. All right, that looks good. Okay. Now let me define a couple of the constants. So all the redirect unauthorized login. So, and then I want to pass this as a blank parameter, and then I want to pass a route, say login. So if the user is not authorized, I want all of those to go to this login page. And similarly, same constant, different constant, and this time I want to have about us page. Let's create one more constant which should go to the settings page. All right, that looks good. So now I think that's all I need for now. Let's roll. Okay. Yeah. So about us, if the user is not, so for example, is not authorized, then I want that user to go to login page. Here you go. For the login, so if user is already logged in, then user should go to the settings page. Same thing goes with sign up. If user is already signed up, then it should go to the login page, or maybe, settings page. And if the settings page is, if the user is already is not signed in, it should go to the login page. So now all my routes are secured. And as we progress and include more pages into my application, you can have the similar implementation. Probably you can reuse it or create more new constants, and you can secure your routes. There's one more very essential piece of information functionality, admin functionality. Now, admin is the page which you use to add or revoke any roles to a given user. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to cover all the details of this page, but what I have done, this is a very simple page, and all the implementation detail, if you go to my GitHub repository, you will find this source code. I'm not going to do a code walkthrough for this page. And also there's one more page you can create where you can create new roles and add and update the roles and responsibilities for different pages. So very simple. These are the very simple implementation. Let me show you where you can find this information. Go to the source directory, and inside the source directory, you will find an auth package and admin. You will find all of those informations, all the admin related pages all out there. So again, if you have any issues, please feel free to reach out to me. Do not comment on the YouTube videos. Please feel, always open a new issue log and include the screenshots or any error you are getting. I'll be happy to help you out. Again, I think there's a lot of information I have covered in this 4 videos. In the next follow-up videos, what I'm going to do, we are going to work on the real ERPX functionality. Now, in these 4 videos, again, I just want to re-emphasize that the idea was to create a bone structure. That means your application's fundamental. Now, in these 4 videos, my application fundamental are ready, the building blocks of my applications. So now in the next follow-up videos, we'll be creating the real apps. That means like let's create an address book app, all the modules, not the app exactly. You can add more and more modules to this existing infrastructure. I hope you like this implementation in this video, and please subscribe and enable the notification, and in next follow-up videos I'll be adding more and more modules and I'll be adding more videos. So once again, thank you for your subscription. Thanks a lot.